All right, so again, my name is Matt LaDuca, and I'll be teaching the class again today. Just an FYI, we kind of got a little ahead of ourselves last time, so we're going to be going over some of the material that we covered in the last class again. If I go too fast or I'm going too slow, just feel free to raise your hand, say, hey, pick it up. It's been a very long day for me today, so it's hump day is just never going to end for me, I don't think. So anyway, you can feel free to let me know if I'm rambling or if I'm just rushing through things. All right, so we're going to be going over creating a high-performing team, starting with training the team members and stakeholders. Again, we talked about this on Monday, so we want to make sure that team members and the stakeholders are adequately trained, and then we're also going to make sure that we're continually evaluating their effectiveness. So starting out here, the enablers, we determine the required competencies and elements of training. So as a project manager, it's kind of one of our things to make sure that we know what everybody needs to know and how they are going to learn how to do it if they don't already know it. Determine what options are available to train. Sometimes it's just online stuff. Sometimes there's leader-led courses. We all know what training options we have, doing PLE stuff here at AT&T. And then allocate resources for training. So it's okay, you guys are going to take the training, or I need to get these people in to train you. And then we want to make sure the training actually occurs, and here they've got measuring the training outcomes. Make sure people learned what they were supposed to learn, essentially. The deliverables, we'll have a training and mentoring plan. We'll have training cost estimates. We'll have a training calendar. We'll have a training assessment and certifications if that was part of the training. And to do that, particularly in creating the training plan, we'll have to obviously get the training gap analysis. What do people know and what do they need to know, and what's the difference, and how do we take care of that? And then, of course, the training itself is a tool that we'll be doing to get them to close that training gap. And then pairing and mentoring, this will, again, we talked about this before, to help people reinforce what they're learning or to help them learn it. So pairing, you're taking two people who are peers, skill-wise, they both are about on the same level of whatever it is that they're doing. And they are helping each other reinforce what they're learning. So when they're going through this stuff, it's like guys that are really advanced are both finding better ways to, really cutting edge ways of coming to solutions. They're working together on that. And then mentoring is generally, it's a person who is better trained, has more knowledge or whatever, is mentoring and coaching someone who has less. All right, I don't think anybody has any questions about that. We're going to go into some more details on that. So the required competencies, we talked about this before too. We have to identify what is required. What do they need to know? And this training does not only just apply to the people who are going to be doing the work. This also applies to the stakeholders who are going to use the product when we're done. So obviously this training might be happening a little further along after we've developed whatever it is we're going to develop. So they have to know how to use the new tool or whatever it is we're developing. So these competencies include knowledge, skills, other attributes. So, when we're talking about IT, there are IT knowledge and skills, and, you're talking about carpentry, there are carpentry knowledge and skills or whatever. So we have to, in order to get these projects moving, you have to know what competencies they need to do that. Different stakeholders will have different training needs. I was just saying, you have people who are delivering the product and people who are using it clearly have two different training needs. If it's a huge project with lots of different pieces to it, and maybe these folks need to learn how to do this, and these folks need to learn how to do something else totally different. Like if you're building an application that has a database, maybe the database people have different training needs than the people who are learning to do the application itself. Team members themselves may require specific training on the customer's business, culture, desired outcomes, and project context. So if you're going to be building a widget for somebody that is going to replace an old widget that they used to have, it'd be a really good idea for you to understand how they use the old widget, what they were using it for, and how it did what it did, so that you are better informed when you develop their new widget. Anybody else have any questions about this right now? Any questions on this? We talked about it again, but if you didn't catch it the last time, or if I'm going too fast still, let me know. Everybody's good with this part of it so far? All right. Elements of training. Training is an activity with team members. We all know what training is. We don't need to go into all the definitions. You guys understand what training is. It's provided to teams, small groups, individuals. So when we have their training, it could be individual training, it could be small group or the whole team. Covers management, technical, administrative topics. So again, whatever the gap is, that will be the topic that you're going to be training for. And then the delivery models, again, instructor-led, virtual classroom, self-paced e-learning, document reviews. We do a lot of that, document reviews. That is something we've done all the way back into waterfall days and prior to waterfall days. We would look at, like I was talking about, if you're building a new widget to replace an old one, you could be reviewing the documents around the old widget to help you understand it better. Interactive simulations, if you need to do that. If you're working on a project to land somebody on Mars, you're going to have simulators to help do things, help develop stuff, or prepare folks for using it or whatever. And then, of course, on-the-job training. You see a lot of that in construction industries, things like that. You might be looking at that in IT. Some people get on-the-job training, in which case you'll be looking at what those mentoring type of relationship as opposed to a pairing type of relationship. So you'll be seeing the on-the-job training there as well. All right, any questions on this? Again, I'm kind of flying through this, but because we covered it already. Okay, guidelines to determine required competencies. Guidelines to determine required competencies. What knowledge should be required for the stakeholder to perform as expected with a new solution? What skills or hands-on experience are needed, blah, blah, blah. What level of buy-in to the solution has been given by the stakeholder, and what aspects of training need to be employed to help develop and support the solution, and what modalities of training should be offered, and what are the relative costs of different approaches. And a lot of these things can all be very, very important. One of the things that I used to do in my previous careers is I used to train police officers in security and defensive tactics. And everybody was like talking about, oh, well, they want all these police officers to be karate experts, be able to do all of the things that they can do so that, they never have to take out their gun and all that kind of stuff. But to get to that level of expertise and to maintain that level of expertise, training cost would be through the roof to try to get all of your, depending on how big a department was, how much does it cost to maintain that? So people come up with other solutions, and one of the ones that I worked with, it was learned to deal with, we spend most of our time doing the same things over and over again. 20% of the different problems that you might encounter are happening 80% of the time. So you train for that 80%, you train for that 20% so you can cover the 80%, you don't worry about all the other things that happen. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. And a buy-in to the solution. What level of buy-in? We talked about buy-in before, as far as, we try to reach consensus on things, but when we're buying into a solution, we have to say, okay, well, this is good. I really want this, and somebody's got to be able to say that's sufficient. We can't reach a consensus that we're going to be prepared for every little tiny thing that comes up instantly. We're going to train for every possibility. We have to get a buy-in to how much training we're going to get and how we're going to be prepared for that. Because part of it, again, is not just the cost, but the time that is that's involved to get everybody up to speed as Java experts and database experts and so forth, and SQL experts would be a phenomenal cost if not everybody on your team is already there. So it could get to be very expensive, and it could delay the start of the project considerably. So some of the things to think about when we're talking about getting people up to speed and the determining what the required competencies are, and there's some negotiation and give and take when we're talking about that. All right, any questions on that? Questions on that? All right, training and mentoring plan. Training should be done as close to the point of solution as possible. We talked about this kind of, I actually interrupted and talked about this a little bit Monday. Make sure that when you're training for to develop the project or whatever you're going to do, you make sure that this is as close to when everybody's ready to start as possible. You don't want people to learn stuff and then not start using it for another year. And you also don't want people starting to learn it and then the project already started and they're still spending time getting up to speed. So scheduling is critical to avoid delaying the overall solution here. So just what we were just talking about there. You're going to perform a gap analysis to identify missing knowledge, skills, and required attributes. We talked about that already when we were planning your training. What are people missing? So it was kind of redundant here. The training plan for team members can include improvement in competencies or possible certification to benefit the project. Like, for instance, somebody might require you be a PMP certified project manager for this. They feel like maybe that's the goal that for the project manager for this thing. That would be something you probably need to start 6 months before the project, right? I mean, we had to go through this whole prep process to learn the material. You could probably do it in a shorter amount of time, but if you're not already there, you have to plan so that you are a PMP certified project manager when the project starts. Okay, any questions about training? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sorry, I have a quick question. So this is kind of from the perspective of training for the stakeholders in terms of training them on the solution. That's how that first line kind of relates. And then that second line is relating to training team members on how they can better, I guess, be prepared for the project itself.
Well, actually,
this
actually applies to both. I mean, again, so
right.
For instance, when you're developing the project, well, part of it is you may not be able to train the end users on how to use it because maybe you don't know yet. You've got a solution maybe, but you certainly haven't worked on developing it yet. So they might not know how to use it. But you don't also, if you do, you don't want to tell them, hey, this is how you're going to use this, and then you spend a year developing it, and then you say, here you go, because they haven't used it. They haven't gotten down, and it's that most knowledge is volatile. We lose it, if we don't use it. So training as close to the point of solution as possible is important for the developers or the people who are going to execute the project, as well as the end users of the project. And the same for all of these things. The scheduling is that's just hammering home this close to the point of solution as possible. And then the gap analysis. I mean, if you're re-engineering something already, a widget, a gadget, or whatever for somebody, and it's going to have the same look and feel, and it's going to have the same everything else. The gap analysis is going to be, well, here's the stuff that we did differently, so they need to know that. And if you are going to be building something with, I'm using IT because that's where I'm from, and mostly Agile is IT. But any project is the same thing. If you already have Java skills, but you've never worked with this particular database before, you have to close the gap for that. So most of the stuff, but there's things you have to fill in. And then, just a training plan for everybody. I mean, the training plan for team members is mostly geared towards the people who are going to execute the project. But certainly, I mean, I don't think once we're done with this, people will be certified as end users of the product, but maybe they are. But that part is primarily just for the team members. Does that answer your question?
That makes sense. Yeah, that answers my question.
Okay. All right, so the training options: virtual, instructor-led, self-paced, document reviews. So these are just some examples here. Live online instructor training. Me right here doing this. We're virtual instructor-led classes. if, for instance, you are talking to your mentors and they're going through the activities and stuff in your mentoring session, so there you got a simulated hands-on lab that are available to do that kind of work. So that would be a similar thing. Self-paced e-learning. If you didn't take this class, you could still pay the fee to Microsoft, or not Microsoft, to PMI, and you could use their bundles. And I believe that pretty much they give you that bundle, and you could go through a self-paced e-learning thing for this same material. Just a second here. So the benefit of the self-paced approach is scalable to solution to a large number of potential students. So for you guys, it would be a good thing for you to be able to do this e-learning. That's one of the benefits of it. Of course, one of the downsides of that, the cons of self-paced e-learning, is you don't have an instructor to answer questions, things like that. And then document reviews, and I talked about that a little bit too. Simple knowledge transfer, sharing relevant documents may be sufficient. So when we are learning about the tool that we're going to replace, if that's what we're doing, or we're learning about what the clients want, we get a knowledge transfer, just sharing relevant documents. And when we're done, maybe it's just a matter of, hey, we just created a bunch of documentation for them to review, to learn how to do it, or to see how things work, and so forth. So that's a simple, probably the simplest training option there. Ideally, if you're going to develop something, the more intuitive it is, the less training you probably need for that. Okay. Any questions about training options? This is all pretty similar. This is the same stuff we talked about Monday. I'm just going into a little more detail here today. And I'm still rambling it through kind of fast, so slow me down if I need to. All right, training cost estimates. As part of the scheduled budget, consider the costs associated to training the project team and customer stakeholders. So one of the things we have to take into consideration when we're working on estimates for the project might be training costs to get everybody up to speed on this, and how much money we need to spend to train. That should be included in your budget. Your training should be included in your budget for the project. Here's just some of the stuff, and there's all kinds of things that cost might include for training. It just depends on what you're training for. These are just some examples: courseware, venue costs, logistic costs, instructional costs, etc. Something to keep in mind. So the big point I want to make on that one is it should be included in your project. The training cost, you should estimate for the training cost on your project. The training calendar, again, we talked about, you want to get things as close as possible to when they're actually going to need that training. So calendar is really good for that. Schedule also needs to be published to the customer stakeholders again, so they need to know when they need to start doing the training, as well as the people who are doing the development or the executing the project. Creating a mechanism for registration and sending confirmation messages could be just as simple as an email going out. Could be something as simple as a spreadsheet. It could be something as simple as a notepad. If you're co-located with everybody there, I mean, maybe you just sign up sheet on a piece of paper and that's it. Here, you sign up here when you want to do it, and then when you come in to take the class, you check your name off and you're done. Provide class rosters and a way to capture signatures of attendees. That's it's kind of overkill as far as I'm concerned, but I don't think you'll be tested on that in particular. But in particular, when you have training and people need to attend that training, depending on what the material is, training might be really important for legal purposes, things like that. For instance, if you're doing, people have to take safety seminars if they're doing construction maybe, and they don't sign off on this, and capture them as attending that class, and then they fall 10 stories into their death, and families saying, well, they never trained them not to do this or to do this or whatever. So those things can get important depending on what the activities are for legal purposes. But beyond the legal purposes, it's a way to make sure that everybody has the training that they need, so that people don't come back later and say, well, you never showed me how to do this, and that's why it took me 10 extra days to do it, or 10 extra weeks to do it. And then manage your training schedule and timing to avoid delaying the project's delivery timeline. Again, same thing. We want to make sure we don't start too late that it interferes with the project's delivery, and we don't want to start too early that they've already forgotten everything they learned when the time comes that they need it. So training calendar, anybody have any questions with that? We're probably good on that, I guess.
Would the whole training thing be as applicable in Agile? Because I thought that you kind of picked your people based on their skill set, and you wanted like the T-shaped as opposed to the I. Would this be more waterfall appropriate?
Well, no, actually, no. This is actually very Agile appropriate, and the reason why I say that is, first of all, let's just say, for instance, that you actually do get to pick your people in Agile, which I have not here at AT&T, and some of my peers in other industries and in the same industry. Generally speaking, we don't get to pick who we get on our teams, although we did talk about a lot of that in the process of doing that. But the other thing is, as when you do select the people, let's say you get to select your people, and your domain, the folks that you have that are applying for the position, none of them have all of the criteria that you need, which case you need, you're going to pick the best candidate out of the bunch, but then you still got to get them up to speed. Does that make sense? So Agile, you would need that as well. And then there's the other thing. I mean, if you're cutting edge, there just might not be anybody out there that has experience in that. So that might also be one of the problems that you have, is that, are the opposite. We had that, I was talking about that last Monday too. One of the projects I just came off of, there was a lot of Perl, and there's not people at AT&T that have that. So there was a lot of getting up to speed on Perl and Perl scripts and things like that. So sometimes it doesn't matter. You're just not going to get somebody with that. And Agile or not Agile, it's important that the people know what they're doing. So there will be training. In a lot of cases, there might not be that much. You might be able to pick the people that have all the skills that you need, and there's not really a gap. I've yet to find that actually the case where the entire team didn't have a gap, or at least part of the team didn't have a gap that we needed to close. I will say that in a lot of waterfall ones, they come in and then they're training on the job because we didn't really assess that. And I've also found that in Agile too, but I found that more in waterfall, where we had people coming in and they really didn't have the skill set, a complete skill set that they needed for the job, and they were learning it on the job. Okay, pairing and mentoring. Pairing customer stakeholders together enables them to reinforce the learning in each other, which again, I was talking about, they're peers. When you're talking about peers, they can work together, and they can leverage their own abilities to help get to something faster. There's a synergy there. So, it's 1 + 1 is 4 or 5, because you got two people who are just brilliant at what they do and they're working together. Or, you got two people that are starting out and they're both still helping each other learn, and it can magnify their progress. Mentoring is more along the lines of an experienced person or a very skilled person working with someone who's less experienced or less skilled or less knowledgeable. So that's the difference between the two of them. And the training focuses on building individual skills still. So you guys are still working on that. If you're doing pair programming in XP, you guys are sitting down together. Person A says, hey, this works out really great. Person B learned that skill because he's working together with them. Or probably in a mentor-mentee relationship, the mentee is probably learning things more, but that doesn't mean that the mentor is not learning things as well. Maybe they're learning other things like how to teach this material better, as opposed to I'm learning more about this material working with somebody who's not as experienced. So there's other things that they're learning there as well. And those relationships can be informal, ad hoc ones, or in the event of you're doing XP, those are actually established. They're they're intentional pairings, and you are either by design as opposed to just reaching out and saying, hey, can you help me with this? And hey, can you help me with this? Okay, any questions on pairing and mentoring? We're flying through this stuff. I'm good with this if you guys are. All right, baseline and post-training assessment. Baselining provides technique for measuring the efficacy of training. How effective was the training, essentially? Attendees complete a pre-assessment before the training. If you can do this, this is great. And then after training, get a post-assessment. So it's like, here's what I knew beforehand, and here's what I know afterwards. So when you took your first practice PMP exam and you got a 40 on it, and then you took the exactual exam and you got a 90 on it, well, you won't really know what your score is, but you'll know you passed or failed. Pre-assessment, post-assessment. So what did you learn doing our PMP certification stuff, essentially? And that will demonstrate your newly acquired levels of competence. Presumably, the concept behind PMI, or what the concept was behind PMI, was that you guys already knew this stuff. You were just taking the exam to certify. But obviously, that's never really been the case, as I think most people understand the concepts of project management. But like for me, I almost never did contract stuff. I didn't do contract negotiations. So procurement was almost non-existent in my entire 14 years of project management when I took the exam. So I learned a lot doing this here, and so this is what we're trying to look for here. This is kind of the same concept. What did we know before we started, and how much did we learn? And are we now prepared to actually do the work? Any questions on this? Baseline and post-training assessments, it's just what did you know before, what did you learn? And so by comparing it to what you learned after, or what you know after. All right, guidelines to ensure training occurs. I mean, obviously there's all the possible ways to do this. You know, Agile kind of gets away from the whole crack the whip kind of thing, but creating awareness that there's training out there and you should learn it. That's one thing to do, but primarily what we're talking about, it mostly is directed training. It's like, hey, you need this stuff. So you can't just say, there's stuff out here, you can go do your training. So that's really one of the ways we're not probably going to be looking at a lot, but probably you should know it. Create invitations to attend the training. So, hey, cloud stuff. When I moved to the cloud project a couple of years ago, I was getting invitations for training for cloud material in Azure daily. I couldn't, there was no way I could attend it all, but they were sending me stuff out constantly for us to give us the opportunity to get into that training. So those invitations were also kind of creating an awareness as well. But engage the customer management for buy-in and commitment to have their employee attend the training programs. So for your customers, maybe they're going to be doing that. You're going to say, hey, here's the stuff you guys are going to need to know to use this product when we're done. Just give us their buy-in and commitment. You know, they're going to be less buy-in and less commitment if it's like, it's going to be a 600-hour course to learn how to use our tool versus, you know, here's we're going to give you a 30-minute seminar and using this tool when we're done. So you're looking for buy-in and commitment on that. And the same thing goes with all of our other training as well, but probably there's less need for buy-in and commitment because they pretty much need it to do the job and to deliver the product. Registration needs to be included in confirmation notification or reminder before the training. These are all kind of ways to ensure training occurs, I guess. I don't think you'll be asked a question about these very specific examples, but you'll probably need to know that you need to ensure training occurs for the exam. And then capture signatures to confirm attendance and participation in pre or post assessments, blah, blah. We already talked about that. Any questions on that? The big takeaway here, ensure training occurs. You don't really need to know all these different specific ones, I don't think. But it's good to know those as examples. But I don't think you need to know them specifically. All right, certifications. Industry certification demonstrates knowledge and skills have been gained during the training. For those of you who've done Microsoft stuff, Microsoft has had tons of different certification stuff, and you might need that for working, for your project, working with Microsoft projects. PMIs, PMP certification is another one that a lot of companies ask for or demand. Same thing with the Agile certified, what is it? I forget what it's called now, but the Agile Certified Professional, the ACP. That's another certification that people might require. SAFE, for those of you that have done the SAFE certification, the Scaled Agile Framework, that's another one. That certification, there's tons of them out there. Cisco has just boatloads of them. So you have all of those different certifications that are available, and those certification exams can vary. So just like what we're talking about, in the time of COVID, you have, we have it delivered online with webcam proctor, which I think is actually for PMI. It's an AI that does the proctoring, and not really a person. You can go to Prometrics testing center with a proctor. You can do it right in a class. I don't think PMI actually has you can test actually in a class. I don't think any of us have that out there. And industry credentials are more portable and more desirable by those who hold this certification, future employers, which is probably a backwards way of saying get your PMP. But all of these industry credentials, depending on what they are very portable. So those certifications are things that we can talk when we're talking about training. Those are things that you might need for the project as well. Any question on this? And they're kind of getting away from the project and more in general, but these are things you might need for the project. Okay, measure training outcomes. Training is ultimately measured by the ability to perform the work needed. Post-assessments and certifications prove knowledge. I can't talk here. I'm sorry, guys. It's a long day. A true test of training is demonstrated by applying the knowledge and skills at the workplace, which we talk about when we talk about the work performance, and we'll talk about that later as well. Essentially, when you're working with folks out on your project, depending on what it is, you'll be if it's agile and you're in a Scrum meeting, you'll be able to see people's velocity, how fast they're moving on stuff, and how good a product they're putting out. Are they asking the right questions? As a project manager, you'll be looking at all of those things. And as a Scrum Master on a project too, you might be looking at those same types of things and helping guide people to where they need to go. So that true test of the training is going to be how they apply it. That kind of goes to almost everything we do. One of my other careers, I was a paramedic, and I worked in a hospital for a very long time. And you see the doctors that come out of there and they're like perfect students in med school, and during their first year of residency, they just can't find they can't find anything with both hands. So you gotta, they learn, but then they didn't really learn. And so they do eventually learn, but it's just how you apply all of these things in the workplace is also a good demonstration of what they learned. So any questions on that? All right, we are flying through this stuff here. So first of all, I'm gonna take a pause right now for questions on this as far as the training goes. And then we'll kind of, do you guys want to take a break? We can do that, or if you want to just press on and we can get done sooner, however you want to work this out. But for right now, let's talk about questions. Does anybody have any questions on the material that we've covered so far? Any questions at all?
Hello, this is Natalie Vasquez. I do have a question about the cost of the training cost estimation. So that should be prior starting the project, right? But we can also have like more training during the project, and that should be added to the whole project cost?
Well, it kind of depends, and part of it is like, for instance, let's just say that you're coming in to a project as a developer, and they know that you don't have a whole lot of experience with, say, let's say they're doing it in Java. So they know that part of you getting up to speed is you getting some of these Java courses done, and they can include that in the project cost. It should be included in the project cost. Now, maybe it won't, but we get other training along the way, and some of those things, they can be absorbed by the project if they're related to that. It's hard to estimate some of those things. I mean, if you're usually it's at the beginning. A lot of the training that we go through during the life of the project is stuff that is I don't know how to say this exactly. It's stuff kind of, as professionals, people should be working on their skills anyway. You should be working on developing your skills. Where you kind of draw the line, I mean, as a project manager, you can include a lot of training in your project if they have a budget for it. If they don't have a budget for it, I mean, learning SQL or learning better ways to do SQL during the course of the project, it's part of it will end up being absorbed in the project. Like, for instance, you're working on a project, you're working on SQL code. Let's just say you're trying to develop a SQL statement to do something, and you're totally lost. And let's say you're not pairing with somebody, you're working on your own, and you run this statement and you generate an error message, and the first thing you do is you go to Stack Overflow. Well, this is education right now. You're looking up an answer because you don't know a solution. So you're educating yourself as you go along. It's being absorbed into the price of the project because you're on the clock doing this. So that is your training. I mean, you're not identifying it as training in your estimate, but it's included in there. It's part of the thing. So, you know, for instance, if you're going to develop this thing and somebody might say, well, this guy's charging me $90 an hour to do this, and he's really good at what he does, and he'll get it done in one day, you know, versus somebody who I'm charging $45 an hour, but it's going to take them 2 days to do it. Well, you're getting the same product. It's just taking you 2 days instead of 1 day. But part of it is that person is doing $45 hours, looking stuff up, and he's doing more training. But it's still essentially built into the project, right? I mean, it still costs money to do that. So you might be paying for education. It's just not listed as education or training on your assessment, on your estimate. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it
Now,
does.
there are other things that are very specific to the project. I mean, like, for instance, this project that I had with all of the Perl script, well, they had to learn how to do that, but we also had to switch to a new tool called Tableau for reporting this data out, and none of the folks had Tableau. So, I mean, learning Tableau had to be part of the training, and so that was an expense on the project. So people had to learn Tableau. So those kinds of things, it's going to be an education. You can mark it that way as such, but some of the other stuff, it's not. You don't mark it as training, but essentially it is. You're going out to the web and you're Googling this particular line of code or this particular error and learning how to fix for that.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. You had another one?
No, thank you.
Any other questions on the training?
I have another question, Matthew.
Okay.
Can you please give us an example of pairing? I mean, I have a good idea of mentoring, but pairing, I don't know.
Are you familiar with Q Messenger?
Yes.
I used to work on Q Messenger, and they did what we called XP. And what they did was they did pairing. So what would happen is one person is writing code and the other person is looking over their shoulder or sharing the screen. And when you're typing the code and he's like, okay, find me a better solution to do this. And so that person is looking stuff up on the web and he comes back to try this. And while he's trying that, he's looking up something else. And so they're working together. One person is typing, we call it driving and navigating. You had the driver who was punching in the code, and you had another person who's looking things up, and every 15 minutes or so, or maybe every half hour, they would switch, and the other person would drive, and the other person, they would switch. One would navigate, and the navigator would drive, and the driver would navigate. So that would be an example of pair programming. So they're working. One person is typing code, and surprisingly, it goes fast. It goes very fast because a lot of, in the particular environment they're in, a lot of the time, one person is stopping to look things up, and then he's going back to type, and then he's stopping to look things up, and he's going back to type. And in this case, they're learning stuff, and they're finding somebody that's typing doesn't know how to do it. He's going to learn from the other person who's going to look it up, and if the person who's looking it up already knew how to do that, he'll just tell him right away, oh, but you can do this. Or if the guy who's typing knows what he's doing and the other guy's watching, he's like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. So it's closing the gaps on things. And when you're both at the same level, generally you're both going to need to look up the same kind of stuff. So you're typing, somebody else is looking up, and that would be an example of pair programming or pair training. Does that make sense, pairing?
Yeah, got it. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. Any other questions on training? Questions on training?
Matt,
Yes.
Matt, this is Anthony.
Hi, Anthony.
Yeah. Can we map the training to any project management process group or knowledge area, or does training occur in any of those except for closing?
Yeah.
Right?
Are you talking about like in the PMBOK?
Yeah.
Hang on a second here. Let me pull this.
I would think it doesn't need to happen during the closing, right? Because
well, actually, in the PMBOK, it doesn't. I'm just looking real fast here myself because you could probably look some of this stuff up in there, but I kind of have So when you're developing your teams of 9.3, if you look that up in the PMBOK, I don't know what page that's on, but 9.3 is probably going to cover a lot of the concepts about training.
yeah, it's acquire resources under executing process group 9.3. I'm looking at the PMBOK right now. So I was in fact looking for it if it's explicitly mentioned there. But,
it doesn't explicitly mention XP. It's an example of when you talk about Agile. Agile is let me minimize this here. Agile is what's the word I'm looking for? It's broad. Okay, so when you're working Agile, you have the option of using Kanban. I don't know if you're familiar with the Kanban boards. If you started reading the Agile handbook, you'll see that. You can have a Kanban board that's got, okay, here's the stuff that I've got to do, here's the stuff that's in progress, here's the stuff that I'm done with. And you move stuff across that board, that's Kanban. And that is not so much time boxed. And then you have Scrum, which is what a lot of people do in Agile generally. Those are the 5 to 8 people, and you have a 2-week iteration. Those are time boxed processes where you go, you still have a backlog, your to-do load, and then you have stuff that's in work that's in progress, which is the stuff that's in your iteration right now, and then you have stuff that's done. And then XP is just another method that they do Agile, which is, a lot of times it's mixed with pair programming. There's a lot of other concepts behind XP. You probably don't need to know XP for the exam. I just give that as an example of pair programming, or pairing up people doing stuff together, working together on it, and they're peers. They work together. It's not a mentoring type of relationship, and you just want to make sure you keep those two separated. The mentoring type relationship, you got somebody who's trained and is knowledgeable helping somebody who's not trained or not knowledgeable. But you won't find XP in the PMBOK, I don't think. It might be. You can go to the glossary and look up XP or extreme programming. If you really want to know more about it, you can go online and look up extreme programming, and you get a much better picture of what it is. But you don't need to. I don't think you know it had need to for the exam. I just use it as an example of pair programming and pairing up. Okay. Does that help?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions on training?
Yeah, this is Dwayne. I have a question, please.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just trying to keep everything in perspective with the reading, and the real world application of everything. So you mentioned the training cost estimates. You mentioned the calendar and other items, and I'm curious how these specifics fit into the grand scheme of project management as we're going along. So how rigid are these processes as far as them being followed in a real world kind of project?
Well, let me that's actually a very good question, and I talk about it a lot more when I was doing it with the PMBOK, was the main book that we're using, and that was we didn't have this material. And let me kind of start from there. The PMBOK was designed as a best practices. It wasn't that you would use every single business process group in there. You weren't going to use every single process in every project that you had. And some of them you weren't going to use it to the degree that they did it in the PMBOK. But if you did this, this was a best practice to do that. And if you did this, here was a best practice to do this. But like, for instance, we talk about estimating is one of the things you'll actually learn coming up here. And estimating, they have lots of different ways to estimate. They have what we call a parametric estimate. We have a bottom-up estimate. We have a parametric estimate. We have different kinds of estimates. And in life of a project, we might actually use all three of those. But in a project that we're building we're laying out a sidewalk. We're going to pour concrete for a sidewalk. We don't need a Monte Carlo simulation for that. This is one of the things I used to talk about a lot of, and I think it might actually come up on the exam, and you guys will learn about it later. Essentially, it's lots and lots and lots of simulations to come up with an estimate or come up with a solution, things like that. But pour concrete. You already know how it works. Everybody, there's no need for a Monte Carlo simulation, and you won't use it. And there's no need for a lot of other things. Probably you're just going to use parametric estimates when you pour concrete. Parametric estimates are like $20 a square foot or something like that. That's a parametric estimate. Meaning it costs $20 a square foot to pour concrete. Then I don't know if that's a really good estimate or not. I'm just making numbers up. But that's one of the things that you might do in that particular kind of project. You're not going to bottom up. You're not going to sit down and say, okay, I need exactly this many square feet of concrete, and it's going to take me this long to mix the concrete. It's going to take me this long to pour it. It's going to take this guy's this long to do the forms. We don't need to break all that stuff down because, somebody's done it so many times. You just need a parametric estimate. It costs $20 a square foot to do it. So the same thing goes now. Some of these things are going to be out there, and you'll use them when you need to, or when you're required to, or when they let you use them, but you won't use everything all the time, like pre-assessment stuff to find out what somebody's qualifications are for a project. A lot of times we're just assigned. It's like they kind of go, oh yeah, you got some front end background, background programming and front end web development, or you got some back end development skills, so they put you there. They might not look anywhere beyond that. So that's kind of where it goes sometimes, and you don't really get the choice of saying, well, I got, it's not like back in the old school days where you're like, I'll take him and and it's the little skinny non-athletic person who's stuck at the end. They don't work that way. A lot of times in industry, you get what you get. You might get a choice, but depending on the industry and what you're working at, again, like landing somebody on Mars, that project, you probably get to pick a lot of people what you're going to do. And there's probably lots of testing involved, whereas, day laborers pouring concrete, not that they're not that that's not a valuable thing, but they probably they need people. There's not going to be a whole lot of tests involved in getting somebody on board. It's something you can learn really fast, and it's something you can do. You just need a strong back and whatever. You might need the people that have more skills. Maybe there's a little bit more to it than that, but it just kind of depends. So in the grand scheme of things, you won't use all of this stuff, and in some cases you won't use half of this stuff. But for the exam, you need to know it because sometimes you do need to use it, and then depending on the level of project management that you're going to be working, you might be using a lot of things that you didn't use before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And that was a very accurate answer to what I was asking in my question. I just want one follow-up statement. So any costs related to estimates or just basically any kind of cost, that will be documented in the project budget portion of the project management plan. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's accurate, and we have different levels of that, and you guys will learn that in cost. We have management reserve, and we have contingency reserves, and then you have the actual estimates for things. And contingency reserves are for like going back to the concrete thing. You might have a contingency reserve for rain. We might lose a couple of days because of rain delay. You have a contingency for that. You have contingency reserve, but so you might calculate an extra 10% into something for that. Then we have a management reserve, and you guys don't need to memorize this right now. You might need to know it later, but for right now, you don't have to. One of the other things we talk about is a management reserve. So, hey, we plan for rain, and we plan for this. We didn't plan for a hurricane, or we didn't plan for earthquake. Things that were just you couldn't have a contingency for because there's just so many potential contingencies out there, and management reserve is over and above that, and that's measured in your budget differently. But you don't need to know that right now. We'll talk about that stuff later. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, but yes, your cost baseline, all of that's where your estimates are end up. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions on training? Not cost, on training. I'll tell you what, let's take a break. I have 4 minutes till, so if you guys want to come back at 6 minutes after the hour, and we'll pick up from there on engage and support virtual teams. And I'm right here. Actually, I'm going to be right back. I'm going to take a health break myself, and then we can. And as soon as I get back from that, if somebody has other questions you want to ask unrelated to this or related to this, we can talk about that then. So I will be right back. You guys can go get yourself some coffee or water, whatever you need. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. It's just been back to back to back to back meetings today. So anybody have any questions? Anything you want to talk about while we're on break here? Covered everything you guys need to talk about. Am I still here? Am I talking? Can somebody hear me? Can somebody say they can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I muted my phone on my headset. Is like I've been back to back to back. I actually had like 20 minutes to put it on the charger. I wasn't sure if I was going to have. I may end up having to switch to my phone later here. So nobody has any questions about either this training material or the previous classes or the exam or administrative stuff. Everybody's been to the PMI site and looked all their stuff up out there and got all their documents, and everybody's good on all of that. don't know if that silence is good or bad. Hopefully everybody's getting all of that stuff, getting your material and reading. And anybody picked up the Agile handbook yet? Started looking at that?
That's on the docket for this weekend.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Well, we'll be talking about it more on the 28th, I believe. The ACP material that we teach, the guy who put that together is actually putting together a 2-hour presentation for you guys for Agile. So
that's wonderful.
Because we actually had slated for that time go over earned value management and critical path, which was a huge part of the previous exams, but apparently they don't even ask those questions now, or don't ask any big detailed questions on that nowadays. So we switched it around a little bit.
Hey Matt, is the Agile handbook the same thing as the book that came with my PMBOK book, Agile Practice?
That's correct. It is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and there's other Agile stuff out there, and almost anything. Have you if you go on the T-search on our here on our stuff, you can search for the Agile COE. I don't have their link off the top of my head, but if you look up the Agile COE, there's a lot of stuff on Agile, and almost everything in there is actually pertinent. That stuff's already been vetted. I mean, you can look up Agile outside of AT&T, and most of it's going to be vetted as well. But it's good to understand the Agile process if you don't already. Agile is practice at different levels here. I think actually somebody mentioned it in the last class where the Agile that they were doing was not really Agile. It was, they said they had to go to Agile, so they did waterfall and broke it down into iterations and called it Agile. So there's a lot of similarities between Agile done right and waterfall done right. But Agile emphasizes a lot of things that we don't necessarily emphasize in waterfall, but that you should still do, like getting feedback from your customers a lot. When you're developing stuff, you should be taking them demos. You should be running stuff by them continuously, whether it's Agile or whether it's waterfall. There's a lot more design and development up front in waterfall, but if you break things down into smaller chunks, you can do lots of little projects, and it's very, very similar to Agile. I mean, everything, there's development. I mean, there has to be some design up front, but you're doing little bits at a time. And in today's IT environment, it makes a lot of sense for new development to be Agile, because you can iteratively develop it, get a minimal viable product and then start tacking on functionality, which is, until the clients run out of money, or until you give them exactly what they want and they don't need it anymore. So that makes sense there, and it's a good thing. I used to be a naysayer for Agile because a lot of people could answer questions like, well, how do you handle change, and they were like, I don't know, how do you handle change? And because for me it was, if you have a project and something comes up and you need more money, you need a change request and you ask for more money. And Agile is saying, well, you just change whatever it is you got to change, but then you run out of money, you don't deliver everything they ask for. So if I want this, and I'm willing to spend $10 million on it, but then I don't get $10 million worth of stuff because so much stuff that I wanted ended up falling below the line, I'm going to be kind of ticked off. But the same thing can happen, except for that along the way, you're saying, well, I'm looking at this right now, and I'm going to need an extra $500,000 to do this, or we're going to have to cut something, Then I get to make a decision along the way, and it's just how you look at it. They talk about the triple constraint triangle. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, where we talk about scope, cost, and time. and it's a triangle essentially. Each leg of the triangle is scope, cost, or time. And if you increase the scope, well, you either got to increase time or cost or both. And if you're going to decrease cost, something has to give, either scope or time, or so forth. So those kinds of things, the waterfall projects are scope driven, and the agile projects are time driven. So it's a time box thing. You get this much time to deliver whatever scope you can, versus here's what I want. You tell me how much time you need to do it. So it's just different faces of the same kind of thing, but it's enough that people differentiate it. I myself, I don't really do it that much, because I look at it as semantics, but that's I like the agile approach a lot more these days than I used to. So, and I'm rambling, and we got another minute. Anybody have any questions? Other questions you got to ask? Want to ask?
It just seems that agile is much less friendly to the support perspective, because in my position, I usually handle waterfall projects, but then they come at us with, oh, we're handling this in an agile way, and it's like, okay, cool, but you're moving so quickly that it's really hard from a support perspective to kind of turn that around and train a call center into supporting your new thing when they support 100 other products. So.
And that could be sometimes, but is getting stuff out there fast. I mean, that's why you have the training stuff. We talked about that, and it's one of the things that right now we don't necessarily address all the time. That's why I'm saying when I talk about agile, I talk about agile done right versus waterfall done right. Both of them done right, I think they're both very effective at what they do. Agile works better for today's thing, where things are object oriented and we have little bitty things microservices and things like that. Agile's great for that, because you can create something small really quickly that integrates with something else really easily, versus the giant opus and the big gigantic applications that we have here that have got so many integrations that you can't change one thing without changing a million other things, which waterfall seems to fit better. And as we replace those big applications, big monolithic applications with smaller, more object-oriented type of tools, waterfall will probably go further and further away, and hopefully it's a good thing for us. We'll see how it all goes. Okay, I have 7 minutes after, actually, so we're going to go ahead and get started, or resume, I guess. Get started is not the right word here. So let's go ahead and get back to this. And we're going to talk about engage and support virtual teams. And I will just, again, preface this like we did the other day. Virtual teams is, for this, I'm still not exactly clear why they talk about virtual teams the way they do. Again, it's if you need to use it, this is a best practice. They frown on virtual teams. Agile is, they like for folks to be co-located, face to face. Everybody's sitting down in a room, or not sitting, standing. That's why we call them stand-ups. You're together and you talk and you're face to face and you get through your stuff. And virtual doesn't really fit that so much, but we have to do that because there are good reasons why we do virtual. You can get resources from, I don't want to just say overseas, but you can get resources from other regions that are less expensive, that are maybe as good or very close to good, or at least a better value for the buck. So we have virtual folks that have to, that end up coming in, and it's cost savings at times. There are other reasons for virtual. The resource that you really want or need might not be co-located with you, and it's better to have him. I'm in St. Louis and I need somebody. There's a guy that's in Washington, in Bothell, Washington, who's just phenomenal, and I really want him on my project, and he really needs to be on this project, but he doesn't want to move. Well, he's going to work virtual, and that's better than having somebody here in St. Louis who maybe not be anywhere near as good as that person is in Bothell. So depending on what you're doing, virtual has got a lot of benefits. There are, again, the downsides. You don't have the co-location, and I guess it's the psychology of the co-location kind of thing. When you're next to somebody, you know, shoulder to shoulder working on this kind of stuff, there is the concept that that's better for our team, but some people might not necessarily feel that way. I think with the COVID stuff that's out here right now, there's certainly the jury is out on the benefits of being co-located and working virtually, and the benefits of it. Both of them. I mean, a lot of places are saying, you know, now that this is over, we're going to continue to work virtual because this is great, you know. And so, which kind of leads to whether co-location is that great or not. And I think the jury is out. For the exam, co-location is good, though. You need that on the exam. Make sure you know that on the exam, co-location is good. So examine virtual team member needs. If you're virtual, what else do you need? Obviously, you're going to need, if you're doing IT kind of stuff, you need a computer that has access to your networks and things like that. And you have the ability to somehow communicate with that person, whether it's WebEx or Q or emails or phone calls or whatever. Investigate alternatives for the virtual team member engagement. Again, how do you get those folks engaged? There's going to be alternative ways to do that. Implement options for virtual team member engagement. And then continually evaluate the effectiveness of a virtual team member engagement. You know, way back when people started not working in the office at AT&T, there was always the, you know, are they working as hard at home as they would in the office? You know, I mean, I've seen it both ways. You know, some people work, you know, you'll hear people that they feel like they're getting tons more done at home than they are in the office. You know, depending on what your virtual environment looks like, that may or may not be true. So kind of one of those things that's not going to be a one size fits all, and there's not going to be a single answer for everything. All right, righty, deliverables and tools. Collaboration technology, we're going to be one of our deliverables. Engagement assessments, it's going to be another deliverable, and the calendar tools will be another deliverable. And the tools that we'll be using are communication, our communication plan, variance analysis, and your PM powers. Makes us sound like superheroes. So let's kind of move on here and we'll talk about all these things. So the collaboration technology enables a team to plan, collaborate, and communicate. Not a substitute for team planning activities such as establishing a team charter, but details how we'll work together. So the technology, one of the technologies that we have, a collaboration technology, is we use Q, we use WebEx, we use Microsoft Teams now, much to my chagrin, but other folks use Slack. There's all kinds of technologies that help us collaborate. There are very technical technology for collaborating, such as WebEx and Slack, and the other technologies for collaborating are very simple. Like we all sit down in a room and we talk around a table. There's Blackboard and dry erase boards and things like that, flip charts. Those are all collaboration technologies. Some of them are more complex than others. Again, all of that is not a substitution for actually planning your activities. It's not a substitution for establishing a team charter and telling you how you're going to work together. Transparency considerations will factor into which collaboration technology is chosen. How, you know, we talk about saving our emails for legal reasons. You know, if there's a legal hold, you can't delete your emails out. All those transparency things. You know, if you're working, you know, if you're collaborating with folks as a remote or a virtual worker, people need to see what you're doing. They need to know what you're working on, and you still need to be transparent about everything that's going on and what you're accomplishing. Those tools might include shared task boards. We just talked about task boards to promote visibility. And so you might have a whiteboard on and use the whiteboard in WebEx. I haven't used it in forever now. We used to use it all the time in Q. And in the AT&T Connecting, I used to use the whiteboard all the time. Messaging and chat boards to enable communication. So there's their messaging. We got Q and Microsoft Teams, and knowledge repositories. So we have T-Space and wikis, things like that to store shared documents, video conferencing tools. So we have WebEx and we have Microsoft Teams, and we used to have AT&T Connect and so forth. So those are all technologies for collaborating. Anybody have any questions about that? You don't need to know those specific examples, but if those examples help you know that, remember that it's collaboration technology, you should do well. Any questions on this? It's pretty straightforward. All right, virtual team member needs. Basic need of a virtual team, a shared goal, which that's a need for any team, right? Not just a virtual one. A clear purpose, again, same thing. Clarity on roles and expectations. This has to be documented a little better when you're a virtual team member. When you're virtual, maybe things that you would normally do, somebody else is doing because they're co-located with everybody else. So maybe the stuff, maybe somebody else has got that task because it's harder for you to do it because you're virtual. Project manager must facilitate and ensure collaboration, and that's true. But that's what we do for everything, not just with virtual team members. So that shouldn't be any different. Just something to remember for virtual team. Any questions on this part so far? All right. Alternatives for a virtual team member engagement. Managing engagement requires persistence and a focus on team dynamics, transparency, accountability, attention to effective communication. Again, team dynamics, when everybody's in the room together, you still have to worry about team dynamics. And, an obnoxious person in the room with you, you may deal with them differently than you do when they're remote, when they're virtual. So you're going to kind of keep an eye on those things and make sure that those things stay on an even keel. Transparency. So for the virtual person, they need to know what you're doing and you need to know what they're doing. Everybody has to have that. Accountability. Are you getting stuff done? Are you at home playing playing solitaire? I mean, people can do that in the office. It's a lot harder. So, you have to be accountable when you're working virtually, and we have to make sure that they're getting stuff done, or they have to make sure they're getting stuff done. Attention to effective communication, which is more important when we're working virtually. Almost nobody that I work with shares their video when they're in a WebEx communication room. When we're talking, I'm in a WebEx chat room and we're talking away and they're sharing their screen like I'm doing right now, but you have no idea what my hands are doing. I talk a lot with my hands and you can't see any of that. But part of our communication, and you'll catch that in the communications section here somewhere down the road, a lot of our communication is nonverbal. We communicate with nods and sighs and rolling our eyes and moving our hands and gestures and things like that. So you have to have an effective method to convey your thoughts, and you also have to be very aware of what you're doing too. I tell my kids this all the time, that I can hear them roll their eyes on the phone. I can't see it, but it's in the tone. It's in everything that they do. So you can hear, and people can hear that. So you have to pay attention to be an effective communicator when you're working virtual, and it's different than when you're not. I mean, if I'm pointing to something with my finger on the screen here right now, you can't tell it, but when I got my mouse running over there, you can see that. And if you're, it's something you have to think about when you're working sometimes. So I can point all I want and nobody has a clue what the heck I'm pointing at because I'm 100 or 1,000 miles away. Use video conferencing tools to facilitate active participation and the ability to assess body language and tone, which I was just kind of talking about, which you can't always do. It depends. Somebody is virtual and they don't have the bandwidth to do that. Usually they don't share their screen. I mean, they don't turn their video on, and that may be a problem, or it may not be a problem. One of the other things is just people speaking. Sometimes I can't necessarily understand what somebody's saying, but if I could see their lips move and I can assess their body language, I understand. I'm catching the words better. Then my hearing isn't great sometimes in the human speech range. I don't hear that. I hear really high pitch and really low, but right there where people talk, sometimes I don't hear it. But if I'm watching and I see the lips move, it all coordinates together. My brain fills in the gaps for me. Enable visibility of the work and work status being done by the virtual team members by using tools such as Kanban style boards. We talked about Kanban just a little while ago. You guys might not have heard that because I think we talked about it on the break, but you have a board that's up there and it says, this is what we have to work on, this is what we've got in progress, and this is what we're done with. And you're going to be looking at those Kanban boards, and with Agile, one of the things we talk about is a small amount of work in progress. You don't want a whole lot of work in progress. And Kanban boards will show that. Hey, we got 20 people working on 40 projects, which means nothing's getting done. At the end of the day, it'll all get done, but or at the end of the project, it'll all get done, but it would be nice to see it this done, and then this done, and then this done, and this done, and this done, and so we work with that. And you could see that if you have a Kanban style board online where anybody could check it whenever they want. Excuse me, I need to do that into the phone here. All right, communication. Effective communication is a key to successful teams, regardless of your virtual or non-virtual nature. Team charter should include communication expectations and details. A good retrospective often provides ways that a team can improve its communication, collaboration, and use of visibility tools. And this was one of the things we talked about in previous sections about the retrospective and lessons learned. The retrospectives are about making the team better, not necessarily about making the product better. I mean, presumably the product will get better as we become better teams. But if you're retrospective, somebody says, well, this is great, except for I can't hear Bob because he's always eating potato chips when we're on the call. And I never know what he's saying. Well, you probably don't want to be that blunt, but there are times when you might have to do that. But you want to, retrospectives is a good way to improve pretty much everything about the team, including communication and collaboration. Okay, any questions about communication? It's a huge topic, and we'll talk about it more in another chapter later, not today, but any questions on that? All right, engagement assessments. Identify team members who can successfully form a coherent working team. While subject matter expertise is needed, other capabilities such as effective teamwork, collaboration, and communications are important. As new members join, team will cycle through team development stages of reforming, storming to produce norms and continually improving. And I talked about that Monday, about forming, storming, norming, and performing kind of thing, which is what they're referencing in this last bullet. And so what this all is saying here is that you can have a guy who is just, or a gal, you could have a person who is a subject matter expert, a professional who just knows everything there is to know about the material, and they don't work well with teams. They don't collaborate well. They don't communicate well. But they know Java like nobody else. It's important that they are able to do these other things. They can't just be a good subject matter expert. And again, as you get new team members in, and they're talking about they'll cycle through the development stages here, they will become part of the team. So you kind of have to reform that team with that new person. It doesn't have to be the big thing that it was when you started the project in the new team. And you'll storm to produce new norms. You got this guy who comes in, somebody rolled off, somebody else rolled in. This guy has pretty much the same skills, but he can do this other stuff that this other guy couldn't. But we still are lacking this thing that this guy who rolled off has that we need to figure out. So you're producing new norms and who's going to be doing what and how they're going to be doing stuff. And again, continually improving. So any questions about that? And again, that actually gets in spades when you're talking about somebody virtual, because it's maybe harder to assess what they can do of your virtual. Questions on that? Anything on engagement assessments?
Is this called something like to have? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you were saying?
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I had a question about this as it pertains to Agile. When you bring on team members, I just want to make sure Agile seems to favor team members that tend to be jack of all trades as opposed to highly subject matter expert. Is that kind of your opinion of it, just based on reading some resources outside here?
It does. And in fact, it does. Somebody earlier mentioned T versus I. I don't know who said that, but that's the T is it's got a big bottom and it's well, it's upside down T, I guess, but or you can either way. You got breadth of knowledge and you have depth of knowledge. Ideally, you want somebody that's a big T. They have a lot of breadth of knowledge and a lot of depth of knowledge. But again, sometimes you don't have, you may need somebody who's a super expert, who's a subject matter expert on one thing. It just kind of depends. Agile prefers that you more along the lines that it's balanced. But
Right.
and
Okay.
you might end up having a team and you bring in an expert who's just is an eye. They know all this about. They have this incredible depth of knowledge on this one particular thing, because that's what you need. So they may be a temporary member of your team. Agile does prefer generalists as opposed to experts. People who are focused on one particular thing.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. And then somebody else had another question. Hello?
I was just wondering how this because this sort of reminded me of when Luke, the last session, said something about the Moscow method.
Yeah, must have, must have, nice to have, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
This is not that. I mean, when we're talking about that, we're more talking about the actual deliverables that we're providing. It's like I want a new app that does this, and this. I have to be able to do this. This would be really nice to have, but I don't have to have it. If that kind of stuff. So that's about prioritizing your work. So when you got 10 user stories, I gotta have 1, 2, and 3. The rest of these guys are nice to have. And here's the it's all prioritizing what the Moscow stuff is. This is not Moscow. This is not prioritizing. This is when we have a team, we want to get somebody who's effective at what they do. We want a good team member. There's not a matter of it's nice to have a subject matter expert who's good with teamwork and collaboration and communication. That's a must, I guess, if you want to say it in that way. But most of these things, you really want all of that. There's almost, and it's been years ago, we had a project and we had a person. I don't even know if she was that good, but she would not collaborate. She would not work on the team. She was on a interfacing application, and we ended up calling the project because she was the only person that they could provide us to do it. And she just, no matter how much she knew about it, she couldn't work with us. And so it was just, couldn't get the job done. And that's, I'm not sure if I'm addressing your issue here, but these things are not prioritizable. I don't think we pretty much need to have all of these things. And on the rare occasion that you can make it work with somebody who's lacking these kinds of things, I guess that's the thing. TV, you see things all the time on TV where you get those people that are just, antisocial or whatever, but they have their way and they get things done, and we just don't work that way. We don't like heroes. I always talk about that to my teams. I don't know if they talk about it here too much in this world or in that terms, but I don't like the concept of heroes because you got a hero, they hit the lottery, they leave, and now you got nobody doing the work. So we have to have people that can do all of these things.
That answers.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So let's. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make a comment because this went back to my question earlier about real world application. It seems like if you're saying that you don't get an opportunity to pick your team, which I heard you say earlier, the engagement assessment would be null and void, right?
I'm sorry. Say that again. I'm not catching.
How do you implement an engagement assessment if you don't get to pick your team?
Well, here's the thing. You don't get to pick your team. This is when we're talking about this. It's when you're given lemons, you make lemonade. So this engagement assessment is not necessarily pre-assessing the person for the team. This is assessing the people that you have and helping them become better team members. So you're assessing them the other ones we talked about, I talked about pre-engagement type of assessments. This is actually they're engaged. What are their gaps? What are we missing? How do we need to get them up to speed? And if one of their gaps is the ability to collaborate, we need to work with them on that. One of their gaps is communication. We need to work on that. And we talked about, when we talked about that, we talked more about the actual skills that were involved. You know, did they have Java? Did they have this? Did they have that? Some of these other softer skills, which as project managers, those are big to us. We use them a lot. Being able to work as a team, being able to collaborate, being able to communicate, those are really important as well. So you do want to assess those once you have somebody on your, once you've engaged somebody and they're working on your team, and then you norm, storm, and norm. You know, you form, storm, norm, and then perform. Again, once you get them, you get everybody together, you get them working so that they work well as a team, and then you figure out how to make them work better as a team, and you keep doing that. You keep checking to see how you can improve and keep improving and keep improving. And then when somebody rolls off and you bring somebody else in, you have to kind of go through the process again with that other person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helped me. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go on to communication plan. This is one of the things that was in the PMBOK before. Communication plan, the project manager should facilitate the creation of initial team communication plan. It includes when does the team meet, what tools are used to track the work status, how often is work status updated, what shared team hours, what are the preferred communication approaches, etc. My communication plan also includes how we work with our clients, how do we work with all of our stakeholders actually. So the communication plan is something that you develop at the beginning of the project, and then you refine it as you go along. You know, somebody rolls off, you take them out of your plan and you put somebody else in if somebody else is coming in their place. You find out that, you know, your team plan said we're going to meet every day for 15 minutes at this particular time, and you find out that, oh, you need more than 15 minutes. Well, you update your plan. So you'll be doing that regularly. What are the team shared team hours, especially if you're not co-located? You know, I work with, just in general, I work with people on the East Coast, the West Coast, and in the Midwest. So I mean, it's the West Coast folks are 2 hours behind me, and the East Coast people are an hour ahead of me. That's a big gap, you know. So some days we have 4 hours together maybe. So you want to look at that and take that into consideration, because hey, this might be the time when we have to do stuff. When we have to all be together, this is the time. What are the preferred communications approaches? How do we want to do this? Do we want to, you know, if we're all co-located, is we all get a room and we start talking? I mean, even when we were co-located before COVID, and I'd be working with folks, I mean, they'd be on 3 different floors. You know, we would still have a WebEx meeting sometimes. And that was their preferred communication method. And we talked about XP and pair programming. A lot of folks will be right next to each other, but they're still on a WebEx meeting because they can share their screen, and it's easier for one person to not be staring over the other person's shoulders. They're just watching their screen as they go along, and we each had 2 screens, and we did our thing that way. So in the communication plan, you're going to encourage the team to adopt its own practices and drive iterative improvements to their communication approaches, which again, like that stand up 15 minutes, this is great. Maybe we need more than 15 minutes as we go along. Let's try it with 30 minutes, see how things work out. All the communication stuff, hey, you know, WebEx isn't working, let's co-locate. Or Q Messenger is a chat room for these kinds of things is great, but we can't use it for this other stuff. So whatever it is, you will come up with your own practices and you will iteratively improve so that you guys are communicating as well as you can communicate. Effective collaboration and broad, accurate visibility across stakeholders is the objective. So we want to effectively collaborate, and we want everybody to be able to see what's going on. Transparency is important. So everybody knows, nobody is surprised when you move out a deployment date. Nobody's surprised when you have to go back and ask for more money. Nobody's surprised when somebody says, oh, we need this requirement too. Where did that go? You know, or we forgot about that, you know, all those kinds of things. It's visibility, kind of eliminates those surprises. Sometimes visibility is painful because we feel, hey, something didn't work out right, and maybe it's our fault, maybe it's not, but visibility isn't always appreciated like it should, but it's really important that we have it. Any questions on the communication plan? The communication plan is actually in the PMBOK, and you guys can look that up. I think it's chapter 10. Not sure of that, but you can look up the communication plan in there. And it talks about more of this stuff in more details. And it's not all Agile related, but there's other stuff in the Agile guide for that too. All right, conflict management. Conflicts and disagreements on any team are inevitable. Effective team charters can help project manager anticipate problematic situations. By anticipating situations of possible disagreement, you can decide on a potential solution and how to handle that situation even before it arises. And we do this every day. Most days we don't even think about it. For instance, today I had a team that I want to move up our deployment date from July 10th to this weekend, actually. The application team, we removed scope. They're done testing. There's really no reason why they can't, but I know they're going to push back. So I already reached out to my boss and said, hey, I may need your help to escalate on this so we can get these guys to go ahead and help us move this project up. May not need it, but I didn't go to my head saying, ooh, here's a possible conflict and a disagreement that's going to come up, and we just do these things and generally, but you can plan for them, and if you have that in your communication plan and in your team charter and things like that, that helps you anticipate those situations and get ahead of them, so that when I ask these folks this question, they can start screaming and yelling, and I can say, oh, well, you know what, we already talked to this person, and they're going to talk to your boss about this, and blah, blah, blah. We already have all these things lined up. So conflict management, a big chunk of conflict management is getting ahead of it before it becomes a problem. The other part of it, too, is, of course, is making sure that we are transparent. For instance, if these folks, in my example, I don't think this is really the case, but let's just say, for instance, that there was other things that were out there, and when we removed the scope, all of a sudden it's like, oh, now we got to deliver this now because we already said we did it, but we really didn't. Okay, if they weren't transparent, that would be a problem, right? They would, all of a sudden, now they got to fight tooth and nail to keep the date where it was because they've got other things on their plate that they didn't finish. And if they were transparent, I would know that, and we would be, we wouldn't be happy, but we would know what was going on, and we wouldn't be fighting a battle that eventually is going to come down to, well, they're not ready yet. So some of these things are good. I mean, and again, you also have to look at it. It's trite, but win-win is really important, because at the end of the day, I keep winning and they keep losing, or vice versa, then people just don't play anymore, and you just end up with more problems. So it's a give and take, and conflict management is sometimes just a matter of good negotiation skills and other things. Sometimes conflict management is just it's a firestorm. You can't solve the problem, and you just got to call down the cavalry and say, we got to do this, and but that's, you escalate on conflict. You don't just jump right to worst case scenario. So something to remember on that, and having it documented on how you handle it or how you're going to handle potential conflict is good, because you can go back, you resort to the documentation and say, here's what we're going to do when this happens, or if this happens. And any question on conflict management? It's one of those soft skills that we do probably every day. We always deal with this stuff. Some people handle it better than others, but okay. All right, guidelines to implement options for virtual team member engagement. Focus on collaboration and team norms before focusing too much on tools, which is always important. The tools are important, but having WebEx does not make you collaborate better if you can't collaborate even in a regular environment. So you want to focus on the actual norms and the collaboration stuff before you focus on the tools. The tools should help, but we should have better ways to do it. I mean, we should have good ways to do it when we implement those. Recognize that the team formation in a virtual environment is difficult, so it's critical to reinforce team mutual commitments, achievements, and opportunities. That's also good in a regular environment too, but virtual environment, it's more so. So you want to reinforce mutual commitments and achievements and opportunities. We succeed as a team, we fail as a team. I didn't get my stuff done and they didn't. I got my stuff done and they didn't get their stuff done is really not the option. Because we, in Agile, which is what this is really kind of referencing here, as a team, you agree to deliver this stuff. In this, we go to this iteration, we agree we're going to deliver these things. We don't agree that I'm going to deliver this and he's going to deliver this and he's going to deliver this. It's we agree to deliver all of these things, and that's kind of what happens. And that's really a team thing. It reinforces that team goals and objectives, and you want to make sure that we keep doing that. Provide opportunities for members of a virtual team to meet in person to build relationship. Well, obviously, sometimes you can't do that. You know, if I'm in St. Louis and somebody else I'm working with is in Middleton, I mean, they're not going to give me a budget to fly there or for me to fly them here. So you can try to do those kinds of things, but it generally keep that in mind. If it's possible, you can do that. Again, this is back to those best practices. If you have a budget to do that, if your company lets you do that, that's a good thing to do. If they don't, well, you're just not worrying about that bullet right now, right? Okay. Any questions on these guidelines to implement these options? Questions? Okay. Calendar tools. Shared calendars help virtual teams plan meetings, coordinate feedback, and improve visibility. We all do the Outlook thing. Some people make their Outlooks visible to everybody else. Some people don't. It's frustrating to me. We do have problems. You know, a lot of times we have people who are not in our Outlook and we don't see their calendars, and we see how those kinds of problems creep up because I don't know why this person can't be there, or I don't even know if they can because I can't tell. It just puts little hash marks all across their thing when I go to Outlook. But shared calendars can help, and you can do things differently than that. I don't know for how many of you folks use Moose out there. So one of our calendar things, it keeps an idea of when we're on vacation, whether we're in the office or not, and so forth. Time box meetings, they improve focus. They encourage teams to set clear agendas and objectives. Helps keep the work on track. Time box meetings are really good, but generally I try to keep meetings time boxed anyway. I don't like to run over on the calls. I like to get started pretty much on time. Like here, if it was up to me, I would start this call at 3 minutes after 5 instead of starting it at 5. That gives people time to get here, and then it'll last till 3 minutes after 7. But generally speaking, you start a meeting on time, you end a meeting on time. That's what's important. And sometimes you got to put stuff on parking lots. Sometimes you got to say, okay, we're done with this call, but we haven't resolved our issue, so we're going to schedule another meeting and we're going to continue this discussion, even if it's right after this call. But it helps improve the focus. Hey, I got 10 minutes to solve this problem, or I got 30 minutes to solve this problem. You got to focus on the problem. You can't. Somebody's got to keep you on track. You can't keep running off into the weeds on things. And it encourages you guys to set clear agendas and objectives. So, hey, you know, you can't have this big, long, mile-long list of objectives in your agenda and only give it 30 minutes. You got to think about it. You got to make sure that your agenda is clear. We want to accomplish this, 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 and this. They used to call this facilitated sessions, and I think in the PMBOK there are times when they talk about facilitated sessions or facilitated meetings, but it's kind of the concept. Team must decide how best to manage its calendar with an eye towards the goal of visibility among the team and relevant stakeholders. So when we have our calendar, we want to make sure that everything is visible to the folks that need to see this, all of those relevant stakeholders, which the team is a member of that as well. Any question on calendar tools? They don't specify one, but think about Moose or Outlook if you're familiar with either one of those. Those are calendar tools. Variance analysis. As a team works, the project manager may produce variance analysis such as accuracy of team estimates, delivery in a sprint, establish a milestone, team performance against targets. So variances are many out there. We have cost variances. We have schedule variances. In Agile, they're not calling it that, but you have a sprint variance. If I say we're going to deliver this, 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 and this in this sprint, and I don't deliver all of those, there's a variance. If I deliver those things and we had time left over, and we add something else to it, there's a variance, but it's a positive variance, in which case we want to maybe increase our velocity for the next one. So these are things we're looking for accuracy in our estimates. We're trying to figure out how good we are at our estimating, and in almost every kind of project type of thing, that's important. Being accurate to those estimates, and I tell people that, particularly with cost, because people they're like, I hear it all the time: under promise and over deliver, which is on the surface can look really good. You know, hey, we said that we could get this done in a year, and we did it in 3 months. That's great, except for now people can't plan for those other 9 months because you said you needed that whole year to do it, and you didn't. You estimated badly, but you came in 6 months under or 9 months under budget, so or under ahead of schedule, and maybe came in, you know, $1 million under budget, which is another problem because guess what? Now there's $1 million that was slated for this that nobody can use now because you spent it, you held on to it until the end of this project. So variances, we try to identify variances and solve them, whether they look like good variances or not. Most variances are still bad, and they'll talk about that when you get into the earned value management stuff and when you're looking at CPI and SPI, they talk about greater than 1 is good, less than 1 is bad. Less than 1 is bad on both those variances because it means you're behind schedule or you're over budget. But the other ones, again, I would contend they're not good either because people can't use those resources because you tied them up because you overestimated what you needed. So it's something to keep in mind. On the exam, when you get to those things, SPI, CPI over 1 is good, and you'll learn about those later, you know, when you talk about too much. Results of variance in, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Question?
Oh, yeah, just a quick question. With the way you're describing kind of under-promising and over-delivering, is that just a form of gold plating, just taking a different form? I mean,
Nope,
is that really kind of what that is, or is that totally different?
Gold plating. Gold plating is you're delivering stuff that they didn't ask for. You know, you're working on something, and they say, "Oh, well, we need this to do this," and then you're like, "Oh, well, we can do this," and you put a little gold filigree around it, gold plate it, and everything else, and they're like, "Well, I didn't need all that." You know, gold plating is bad. Sometimes it works in your favor, but you're wasting time. It's better to come in early than to deliver gold plating, or it's better to come in under budget than to gold plate. Preferably is you don't do either. You give them exactly what they asked for, and you go from there. So it's a little harder to gold plate in Agile because they're looking at stuff all along the way, and you're demoing at a minimal viable product. And after they've said it's okay, you don't usually continue to do that. So gold plating is less of a problem, I think, in Agile. You know, it's like we went through it, we demoed it. They said, "This is great. I like it just the way it is." You're done. I mean, there's not really much. If you work on it after that, you're just asking for trouble, right? I mean, because they already said they're good with it. So yeah, that's gold plating. This over promising and under delivering is just it's a horrible practice. People do it. Sometimes it's accidental, but most of the time it's intentional. You know, it's like, well, we're going to add an extra 15% because, you know, these things could happen. And good estimating, you don't have to worry about that because you got it built into your estimates. But you know, sometimes you get layers of estimates. I estimate it. I'm the guy with boots on the ground, and I say it's going to cost this much to do this, and then this other guy that I hand this off to adds 10%, and then somebody else, he hands it off to somebody else who adds 10% because they don't know why the estimate is where it is, and they give it to the project manager who's like, "Oh, I'm going to add 10% for contingency reserve," and next thing you know, you're 40% over budget. I mean, you're 40% asking for 40% more than you probably need. You know, and sometimes it works out because things don't go right and you end up needing all of that, but that's not the norm. So, all right. So results of a variance analysis may be shared as part of the retrospective as it's to serve as a basis for problem solving, identification of lessons learned, proposed improvement to experiment for subsequent iterations. So obviously, hey guys, guess what? We delivered half of our sprint this time around. Well, there's your variance analysis, sharing it as part of your retrospective. How do we avoid this problem next time? So that's what you're doing there. Any questions on this part? All right, powers of a PM. Here's the superhero thing. Okay, for virtual teams, the risk of individual team members becoming isolated from other team members is inherent. Important to focus on shared commitment versus individual accomplishments regarding tasks. By instilling a sense of shared commitments to the team, starting with a team charter, then team members will adopt certain behaviors to reinforce collaboration and promote visibility. As a project manager of a virtual team, you must reinforce the team goals over individual performance and enable teams to self-organize and be accountable for our deliverables. So all of these things are talking about some of the things that need to do, and then of course this fourth bullet is sort of how the project manager is going to do this. They don't really say how they do it. It's just that it says you have to do that, which we do. That's one of the things we have to do. We got to reinforce the team goals over the individual performance. It doesn't matter that you did a great job for the rest of the team just totally crapped out and the project never got delivered. All your deliverables are fine, but we still can't deliver. You know, we got to enforce the team goals over the individual performance. We have to enable them to self-organize. So when they sit down and they talk about our velocity, you know, if they have to be able to sit back and look, and you as a PM have to say, do you really think you can get 1,000 story points in this iteration? If they're not, you know, if they're self-organizing and they're not thinking of things that they need to be thinking about, you want to cover those, right? You want to get them on the straight and narrow, and sometimes we can, sometimes we don't know it. So, but then you figure that out, and you got to be held accountable for your deliverables. So the team has to be accountable, and as a project manager, you have to point those things out. It's one of the not so nice things that we have to do as a project manager. Hey, you guys only delivered half of your iteration, half of the story points in this iteration that you promised to do. You got to hold them accountable. I mean, you know, you can't take out the whip and start beating people because of it, but you know, you gotta make sure that they are accountable and that they know and they don't keep doing that. Okay, questions on that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next one here. All right, guidelines to continually evaluate the effectiveness of virtual team member engagement. Track the progress of your team as they carry out the work and produce deliverables. This we do not just as a virtual team, but any kind of team. Again, ensure the meetings like daily stand-up are not just status updates, but value commitments from the team to itself. I do this almost every project that I work as a Scrum Master on. I make sure the stand-ups are not just, I want to know what you did yesterday. I want to know what you did, what you're going to do today, and I want to know what roadblocks you have. That's the status part of that. When they say, well, I did this yesterday and it's half of what they planned to do, you got to be asking questions. You got to be prepared to ask questions or parking lot stuff to talk with them later. So those kinds of things are, you want to hold people accountable. You want to value commitment from them to say, I will do what I'm saying I'm going to do. And if you see that it's the same story every day, I'm going to work on this tomorrow. I did this today. I'm going to work on this tomorrow. And it's the same story over and over and over again. It's like you're spinning your wheels. Where are we at? Why are we doing this? We're not delivering value because you're stuck. And sometimes it's not about pointing fingers. It's about making sure that everything gets covered. Use video conferencing tools. Again, you know, if you can see people and talk with them and see what's going on, it's supposed to help. I'm not sure about the value of it. We generally, our video conferences, we share a screen like we're doing now, and people don't really see us, but it's a good thing to do that. And on the exam, video conferencing is good. And then time box your meetings. You got an hour for this meeting. You spend an hour on that meeting, and you talk about the stuff that you got. You don't go over another hour or half an hour over. It happens. I'm on a lot of meetings that are not mine that happens on, and it's not fun. Anybody that's been stuck on a meeting 15 minutes or an hour longer than it's supposed to be is ugly. So, any questions on that? On the guidelines to continually evaluate effectiveness, this is essentially for not just virtual teams, but for any team. Any questions? Okay, and then so we don't really need to talk about learning goals. We talked about all this kind of stuff. And we don't need to worry about that part either. You guys can talk about that on your mentoring calls. So we are done. We got 7 minutes left today. Any questions? Anybody have any questions on anything that we talked about today, first of all? Any questions on why you think it's important to identify and document a project stakeholders? Anything about why we share a situation when you're required to communicate, Do you guys have any questions about any of the stuff we talked about these last 2 days? Questions on any of this stuff? Okay. Tell you what, it's got 7 minutes left. If you want to go ahead and drop, you can. If you want to stick around, you got questions, I'm here to answer any other questions, including the stuff we covered today. I know it's hard to ask questions while all those beeps are going on. Does anybody have any questions, comments,
I do.
concerns?
I'm
wait till the beep stops. Okay. There, it looks like it slowed down. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is, you talked about the Kanban tools and different stuff like that. I've used Miro before in the past. Are there specific tools that you use, through your project management for organization, storyboarding, that kind of stuff?
Well, right now I use Jira a lot to do that. Jira is one of the first things that's going to go away with Project Jaguar and PlanView. So for storyboarding and things like that, we plan a lot with Jira, but now I don't really get to do it. I mean, I'm kind of shying away from it because I know it's going to go away. And I'm actually just moved to a new assignment, so I'm picking up projects that are already kind of underway. So I really have a chance to do that.
Okay.
But yeah. Any other questions? Anybody have questions about anything as far as this material goes, or other questions regarding the PMI exam or PMI in general? Got 5 minutes left here. Anybody? Questions?
Hi, my
Hi.
name Natalie again. So I do have another question. I know there's reflective questions that we're seeing in your screen right now. We should talk of that with our mentor or with the mentoring class. But when they're talking about the approach and the communication method, are they talking about the tools or the deliverables?
Let's see here. So when you share a situation when you're required to communicate a difficult message about a project to its sponsor or a top-level executive, what approach and communication method did you take? Now, the communication method is pretty straightforward. Did you pick up a phone and call them? Did you schedule a call and schedule a meeting to talk with them? Did you send them an email? Did you send them a text? Did you put a letter in a mailbox and walk away from it? I mean, that would be your communication method, the method that you did that. And when you get into communication, you'll talk about methods more, and you'll talk about push methods and pull methods and interactive methods and stuff like that. And I don't want to get into too much about that then. But yeah, that's what we're talking about as far as the communication method. The approach is a little bit different. Your approach might be to communicating a difficult message to the sponsor. Obviously the approach that the PMI is going to be looking for on the PMP is that you're candid and that you're transparent. And sometimes you have to eat some humble pie going into these kinds of calls. You got. Obviously, a difficult message would be a message that probably is, "Hey, we're behind schedule, or this solution isn't going to work," or something. It's a difficult message. I mean, just by nature, you don't really want to expose yourself, but you kind of have to. So you want to be transparent that's an approach you want to take, is explain what's going on and why things are going on. And, it's even more difficult when it's something that's your fault or something that it's your team's fault. But again, transparency is important, and owning up to your failures as well as your successes is important. So, the other approach that you can take is, you try to be low key. You don't give them all the details. You give them what you think is the necessary details without filling in the blanks. I talk to people a lot about active voice versus passive voice. Active voice is I did this, I did this, I did this, he did this, they did this, whatever, versus this was done. And I find that a lot of people will use passive voice generally speaking, when they're trying to avoid pointing a finger or they're trying to hide something. So, and I saw this on the previous, in previous exams, you kind of had to describe what you did on a project, and people would say, the project, the schedule was created. Well, who created the schedule? Well, they didn't want to say that because they didn't create the schedule, but they wanted to, kind of by implying that they did, but they used passive voice to hide that. And so people do things like that. They don't want to point a finger either for good reasons or for bad reasons. Maybe, Bob did something bad. You don't want to, Bob's a good guy and he's really smart, and, you don't necessarily want to single him out, but, sometimes maybe you have to, maybe. So you say, this was done, instead of saying Bob did this. So you want to be, your approach, you want to be transparent, and you want to be candid, and when in your approach, you obviously, other approaches you could take is being belligerent and things like that. You don't want to do that either. You definitely don't want to be an aggressor when you're communicating a difficult message. Some people feel like the best defense is a good offense kind of thing, and you don't want to approach it that way either. So, but this is when you're talking about on the exam, transparency, ethics, candor. Those are all the things that they're going to be looking for. And if it's something like that on the exam, those will be the right answer.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Oh, actually, I'll take one more question and then we're done. One last question. Anybody? Last question? Going once? Going twice? All right. Well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate your time today. You all have a good rest of the day, and hopefully, I'm not sure who's teaching Monday, but hopefully you got a good instructor, and you guys will continue to learn. And whoever said they were going to open up that Agile handbook over the weekend, make sure you do that. And if you didn't say that, you probably still want to do that if you haven't looked at it yet. All right. Thank you, guys. You guys all have a good one.
Thank you, Matt.